The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was standing at the kitchen counter, pouring my second cup of coffee. I remember the exact moment because the sun was just starting to come through the window above the sink, and I was thinking about nothing more serious than whether I had time to shovel the driveway before my 9 o'clock. That's the thing about the moments that change your life. They never announce themselves. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number, 416 area code, Toronto. I almost let it go to voicemail. Mr. Callahan? The voice was professional, careful. This is Patricia Nguyen calling from Meridian Trust on King Street West. I apologize for contacting you directly, but I'm looking at something on our end that's, well, sir, I need to ask you a question and I need you to be very honest with me. I set down my coffee. Of course. What's going on? There was a brief pause. Are you currently in our branch, right now, as we're speaking? I'm standing in my kitchen in Oakville, I said. Why? Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Callahan, there is a man here who has presented identification in your name. He is sitting across from our notary with your wife. I didn't say anything for a moment. I'm not sure I could. Sir, she continued, lowering her voice slightly, your wife told us you had a medical appointment this morning and that you had pre-authorized her to act on your behalf. But the man beside her, he has your ID, your driver's license, your SIN card. And I have to tell you, something about this doesn't sit right with me. That's why I'm calling. I looked out the window at my quiet street, at the snow still sitting heavy on the cedar hedges, and I said the only thing that made sense to me in that moment. Don't let them sign anything. I'm on my way. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer with a firm in Hamilton, retired 4 years ago, and I have spent most of my adult life believing that if you worked hard, kept your word, and took care of the people you loved, life would be decent to you. I built a good house on that belief. A real one, not just a figure of speech. My wife and I bought our home in Oakville in 1997, added the sunroom in 2003, finished the basement for the grandkids 2 years before I retired. Her name is my wife. I'll call her that for now, because that's what I believed she was. We met when I was 31 and she was 28. She was working as an administrative coordinator at a civil engineering firm downtown, and we were introduced through a mutual colleague at a Christmas party at the Harbor Castle. I thought she was the most composed woman I had ever met. That composure, I would later understand, was something else entirely, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We married in 1991. We had one daughter, Melissa, who is now 34 and lives in Vancouver. For the first 20 years, I would have described our marriage as solid, comfortable, real. We weren't the couple who danced in the kitchen or wrote each other love notes, but we were partners. We showed up for each other, or so I thought. Things began to shift, quietly, about 6 years ago. I can see it clearly now, the way you can always see the road signs after you've already missed the exit. She started mentioning that she felt anxious about our finances. Not because we were struggling, we weren't. My pension from the firm was comfortable. The house was paid off. We had RRSPs and a non-registered investment account that my financial advisor at TD had helped us build over 20 years. We were, by any reasonable measure, secure. But she would sit at the kitchen table with statements spread out in front of her and tell me she felt scared, that she didn't fully understand where everything was, that if something happened to me, she wouldn't know what to do. I thought she was being practical. I thought she was being responsible. Let me handle it, she said one evening, sliding the statements toward her side of the table. I'll get organized. I'll make sure I understand everything. It'll be good for both of us. I nodded and went to watch the news. That was the first door I opened without knowing what was behind it. Over the following year, she gradually became the primary contact on most of our accounts. I told myself it made sense she had more time now, and it gave her something to focus on. She'd always been meticulous about paperwork. She set up online access, updated contact information, arranged for statements to go to a new email she created specifically for household finances. An email I didn't have the password to, though she assured me she'd written it down somewhere safe. When I asked to review things, she'd pull up a summary spreadsheet she'd put together herself. Numbers that looked right. Balances that seemed in order. I trusted her the way you trust someone you've shared a bed with for 30 years. That kind of trust is its own blindness. About 2 years ago, she told me her doctor had flagged something with her heart. Not serious, she said, but enough that she needed to reduce her stress levels. Her cardiologist had recommended she avoid anything that caused her anxiety. Financial stress is the worst for me, she told me, pressing her hand to her chest in a way that I now recognize as performance. I need to know things are stable. I need to feel like we're protected. So I agreed when she suggested we consolidate. Move some things. Simplify. I signed documents she placed in front of me at the kitchen table, transfer authorizations, account reorganization forms, a limited power of attorney that she said was standard, just in case something happened to either of us. I didn't call my lawyer. I didn't call my financial advisor. I signed where she pointed, and I trusted her, the way I had trusted her for 3 decades. What I didn't know, what I was about to find out on a Tuesday morning in January, was that for the past 18 months, my wife had been systematically moving our joint assets into accounts that only she controlled, and she had not been doing it alone. I drove the 40 minutes from Oakville to the Meridian Trust branch on King Street in a state of absolute stillness, not calm stillness. The kind where your body keeps functioning, but your mind has gone somewhere else entirely, trying to make sense of information that doesn't fit into any framework you have. The branch manager, a man named Gerald Foster, met me in the lobby. He was perhaps 45, wearing a dark blazer, and he had the careful expression of someone who had handled difficult situations before, but found this one particularly unusual. "Mr. Callahan, thank you for coming so quickly." He shook my hand. "Patricia did the right thing calling you. We've asked them to wait. They're in our secondary meeting room." "Who is he?" I asked. "The man with my ID." Gerald hesitated. "We were hoping you might be able to tell us. He presented a driver's license and a SIN card in your name. The photo has been altered subtly, but our notary noticed it when she compared it to your account profile photo. That's what raised the flag." I followed Gerald down a short hallway. He paused outside a frosted glass door and looked at me. "Are you ready?" I told him I was. I don't know if that was true. He opened the door. My wife was sitting at a small table, her hands folded in front of her, wearing the gray wool coat she'd had for years. She looked up when the door opened, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do before it collapsed. Just for a second, before she rebuilt it. But I saw it. The man beside her was someone I recognized. His real name was Derek. He was 41 years old. He was the boyfriend of our daughter Melissa, or had been, until Melissa had ended the relationship 8 months ago, not long after she moved to Vancouver. I had met him perhaps a dozen times over the years. He was always pleasant enough, quiet, attentive. He had also, it was now apparent, been involved with my wife in a way that had nothing to do with pleasantness or quiet. I stood in the doorway of that meeting room and looked at the two of them, and I felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was more like the sensation of a floor giving way, that moment between standing and falling when your body understands what's happening before your mind does. "Robert," my wife said. Her voice was steady. She had always been composed. "Don't," I said. That was all. Gerald stepped forward and explained that the meeting was suspended, that the documents had not been executed, and that Meridian Trust would be contacting their fraud and compliance team immediately. He asked Derek to hand over the identification he had presented. Derek did so without a word. I walked back out to the lobby and sat down in one of the chairs by the window. Outside on King Street, the city went about its morning. A streetcar rumbled past. A woman walked by with a coffee in each hand. Patricia Nguyen, the woman who had called me, came and sat in the chair beside me. She was in her late 30s, practical looking, with reading glasses pushed up on her head. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I knew something was wrong. I've been in banking for 14 years. You develop a feeling." "Thank you," I said. "You saved me." She shook her head slightly. "You answered the phone. Not everyone does." I want to be clear about what they had been attempting that morning, because understanding it matters. My wife and Derek had arranged an appointment at Meridian Trust to execute a notarized transfer of the principal asset in our joint investment account, approximately $340,000 in a balanced portfolio I had been building since 1998. The transfer was directed to a private account that had been opened 3 weeks earlier, in my wife's name alone. The legal mechanism they were using was the limited power of attorney I had signed at the kitchen table 2 years prior. The document, she told me, was standard and routine. Under that document, she had the authority to act on my behalf in financial matters. What she was attempting to do was legal in structure but fraudulent in execution, using a man with falsified identification to impersonate me and confirm my presence, as some accounts required dual confirmation for large transfers. What they didn't account for was Patricia Nguyen's 14 years of instinct, and the fact that my account profile photo taken when I opened the account in 2001 was a clearer reference than they expected. The police were called to the branch. I gave a statement that morning. A detective named Sergeant Beaumont from the Financial Crimes Unit spoke with me for nearly 2 hours. He was methodical and thorough, and he told me, with the directness that I found strangely comforting, that this was not an uncommon scheme, that it was more sophisticated than most, and that the evidence, the falsified ID, the account trail, the transfer authorization was significant. My wife and Derek were taken in for questioning. She called our home phone that evening, the call going to the answering machine because I didn't pick up. Her message was 12 seconds long. She said she could explain everything and that I needed to hear her side. I did not call her back. In the days that followed, I began going through everything. I called my financial advisor at TD, a man I'd worked with for over 15 years, and asked him to conduct a full review of every account he managed for us. I called my lawyer, Ron, who had handled our wills and real estate over the years, and I explained what had happened. I pulled out every financial document in the house, statements, forms, the power of attorney, and I spread them across the dining room table, and I went through them one by one. What I found did not surprise me anymore. That was perhaps the saddest part by that point. I was past surprise. Over 18 months, she had transferred approximately $67,000 from our joint savings account at RBC through a series of small withdrawals and inter-account transfers, routing it through an account I had not known existed. She had canceled the tenant insurance on the rental property we owned in Burlington without telling me, redirected the rental income payments, and changed the mailing address on 2 of our TFSA statements so that the correspondence went to a post office box I'd never heard of. None of it was enough on its own to trigger an automatic alert. That was the design of it. Small enough to avoid detection, consistent enough to add up. Ron reviewed the power of attorney and confirmed that while the document itself was valid, its use in the attempted Meridian transfer, combined with the falsified identification and the fraudulent nature of the consent, constituted fraud. Sergeant Beaumont's team had already come to the same conclusion. Melissa called me from Vancouver on the 4th day. She had heard from a cousin, apparently, because I hadn't been able to bring myself to call her yet. She was silent for a long moment after I finished telling her. Then she said, in a voice that sounded very young and very old at the same time, "I ended things with Derek because I found messages on his phone. I didn't know what they meant then. I think I do now. I didn't know what to say to my daughter in that moment. I'm not sure there was anything to say. We stayed on the phone together for a while anyway, not saying much, which is sometimes the only honest thing you can do. My wife was charged 6 weeks later. The charges included fraud over $5,000, identity fraud through a third party, and breach of fiduciary duty under the power of attorney, a charge that Ron told me was less common but applicable given the circumstances. Derek faced charges of identity fraud and fraud over $5,000. I filed for divorce in February. The house, our home, is still mine. Ron ensured the separation agreement reflected the documented financial misconduct, and the court was not unsympathetic. The assets that had been transferred were traced and frozen through the investigation. The $340,000 was never moved. I recovered most of what had been taken from the joint savings account, though not all of it, some of it, as Sergeant Beaumont told me with professional candor, had simply been spent. I'm not going to tell you I handled all of this with grace. I didn't, not entirely. There were nights that first winter when I sat at the kitchen table alone with the statements spread out in front of me and felt something I can only describe as erasure, as if 30 years of my life had been written in pencil and someone had gone over it with a careful hand, removing things I couldn't quite see anymore. I did not understand how someone could share a life with another person for 3 decades and construct, in parallel, something so deliberate and cold. I still don't. Not fully. I don't think understanding it is actually possible from the outside. What I do know is this. I had seen the signs. Not clearly, not in a way that my conscience can really blame myself for missing entirely, but they were there. The gradual accumulation of control, the manufactured anxiety about finances, the medical concern that appeared exactly when it needed to appear, to justify the shift in how decisions were made, the slow, patient repositioning of everything until she stood between me and any clear view of what we actually had. I spent a long time thinking I should have been smarter, that I should have asked more questions, demanded more access, been less trusting, maybe. But I also think there's something in the nature of long relationships that creates a specific kind of blindness, not stupidity, not weakness, but the ordinary human act of faith. You believe the person beside you at the kitchen table, year after year, because the alternative is to live as though you are always in danger, and that is not a life worth living. What I know now, that I didn't know then, is that faith and vigilance are not opposites. You can trust the people you love, and still stay informed. You can be a partner without handing over your ability to see. I have a different financial advisor now, a woman named Claire, who works out of a firm in Burlington, and who, in our first meeting, spent 45 minutes asking me questions about what I knew and didn't know about my own accounts. I was embarrassed by some of my answers. She was not. She just made notes and built me a clear, accessible picture of everything I had, explained in terms that required no intermediary to understand. I call Ron every few months, not always for any specific legal reason, but because it's become clear to me that having someone in your corner who understands your situation before you need them is not paranoia. It's just sense. Melissa came home for a week in March. We drove out to the Niagara Escarpment one afternoon and walked one of the trails along the Bruce, the kind of early spring day where the mud is still frozen in the shadows, but the sun is warm enough to take your jacket off. We didn't talk about her mother much. We talked about her work, her apartment in Kitts, a man she'd recently met who she described in careful, cautious terms that told me she liked him more than she was ready to say. On the drive back, she said, "I'm glad you're okay, Dad." I thought about that for a moment. "I'm getting there," I said. She nodded. "That's the same thing." I'm telling you this because I know some of you listening have had a call like mine. Maybe not from a bank on a Tuesday morning. Maybe not about a notary and a man with your photo on his driver's license, but a call, a moment, something that arrived quietly and rearranged everything you thought you understood. And maybe you're still in the middle of it, still sitting at the table with the statements spread out, trying to understand what you're looking at. I want you to know that the floor coming out from under you is not the end of the story. It's just the end of one version of it. I'm 63 years old. I shoveled my driveway this morning. The sun came through the kitchen window and I stood there with my coffee and I thought about nothing more complicated than whether the forecast was right about the weekend. It was a good morning. I know the warning signs now. I know what slow, patient erosion looks like. I know that documents have weight, and that weight should never be handed to someone else without understanding what you're holding. I know that a woman named Patricia Nguyen trusted her instincts on a Tuesday morning, and that because she did, I still have a house, a pension, and a daughter who calls me every Sunday. I never opened the letter my wife sent to the house in March. I still have it, sealed, in the drawer of my desk. I'm not sure why I haven't thrown it away. Maybe because some part of me is still, after everything, the person who stood at a Christmas party in 1989 and believed that composure was something to be trusted. But I've learned to trust other things now. Myself, mostly. That's where I should have started all along.